Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to the panel. We'll be starting in just a minute. We'll give people another second or two to trickle in before I start. Okay. Hi, and welcome back to Rainbow Space Magic. This is the How Do You Write When the World is Falling Apart panel. And I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves in a minute, but I'm just going to go over a couple of logistics first. You're welcome to use the chat to introduce yourself, to talk to each other, and to share recommendations in a respectful manner. If you have a question for any of us on the panel, you can put it in the chat. If you could put a question mark at the front at the beginning so that it's easy for us to pull out those questions, that would be great. Or you can use the Q&A function, which you'll find in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. There'll be time for questions at closer to the end of the panel, but you can feel free to add them, whenever you want. So without much further ado, let's get started. So I'm also the moderator of today's panel. So my name is Monique. My pronouns are she, her. I live on the unceded land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe in what is currently referred to as Ottawa, Canada. I write mostly short science fiction. I like to joke that it's lesbians in space. That's not really much of a joke. Although my couple upcoming stories are more plants in space, or plants and lesbians in space, I guess. So uh, that's what I do. So now I'm just going to call on each of the other panelists to introduce themselves before we get started. So Genevieve, do you want to go?
Sure. Hello, I'm Genevieve Clovis. My pronouns are she, her. I am a freelance editor, an author, and a writing coach, and I speculize. I specialize in speculative fiction. I write better than I speak.
I always joke when people say that like I should be able to come up with like language to, explain something that I'm a writer, not a speaker. So,
Yeah, exactly.
SJ?
Hi everyone. SJ Groenewegen. My pronouns are either she, her, or they, them. I have no idea why they're not appearing. I, it's a Zoom thing. Let's just stick with that. I'm was born in Australia, but I've lived in the UK now for the last 20 plus years. Actually making the Highlands of Scotland my home now. I'm working on the accent terribly. I Yeah, I used to be a civil servant, but I gave that up about slightly over 5 years ago to write speculative fiction full time, or attempt to. I've had one original novel published so far called The Disinformation War, plus a few very loosely related to Doctor Who novels published by a company called Candy Jar, basically, and short stories and all sorts of things like that. And they are all contain queer content because it's normal.
Exactly, exactly. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel A. Rosen, she, her. I'm a teacher, activist, graphic designer, podcaster, and sometimes I also write books. I'm the author of the Sleep of Reason series. The first two, Cascade and Light, are out now, and they're climate dystopian fantasy. I'm also the co-author of the Sad Bastard Cookbook, and I'm joining from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat.
Excellent. Thank you. And then Ash.
So hi, my name is Ash. I am also in Canada, about an hour west of Toronto, on the Haldimand Trek, which is the unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral Nations. In a past life, I designed and published 11 tabletop role-playing games, and now I write trans romance. My debut self-published novel, which was published in March, has been picked up by a publisher and is going to be a 4-book series that will be published through 2026 and 2027. So look out for that.
Excellent. That's so exciting. Okay, so let's get into our questions. And we've sort of crowdsourced these amongst ourselves over the last few weeks. And I want to start with, do you find it difficult to work given the awfulness of what is going on? Like, what strategies do you use to get past this? Or if it isn't an issue for you, and I think everybody's in different places with this sort of thing, why do you think that's the case? Ash, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm not going to say that we're definitely living in the worst timeline when it comes to being trans. But I also am continuing to set new word count records, but that is because of the work that I did at the beginning of the pandemic. When we all got locked in our houses and I got locked in my house with my gender, I didn't write anything or really get out of bed for 6 months. And in order to get back to writing, I really had to give myself permission to write almost nothing because I was used to being able to knock out like 1,000, 2,000 words a day. And, it was just like every day, if I could just write like 200 words or even like 100 words some days. And it took honestly like 6 months to get back up to even half of the word count that I'd been doing the pre-pandemic. So it's taken like a lot of consistency, but also like giving myself grace to like not be as productive as I felt like I should be in order to get back to that place where I am, smashing out huge word counts on a daily basis. But like it was very long intentional process to get back there.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, how about you?
Yeah, well, I'm not exactly the world's most disciplined writer to begin with, and I kind of write in fits and starts, and I'll bang out a ton of words, and then I'll go months without writing much of anything. And when I started my series, it was the awfulness of what was happening around me and around like 2015, 2016 that made me have the fire to finish it and publish it and then do another one. And lately I found that it's gotten too much. It's hard to make up imaginary problems when the real ones seem insurmountable. And I mean, I started writing it as a warning about rising fascism and climate crisis, and now events have eclipsed that warning. So I don't know if I have any particular strategies other than just kind of plug through it, but it's definitely been harder than usual lately.
Genevieve?
I'm a little bit similar to Rachel in my fits and starts approach to writing. I definitely have like spikes of productivity and then periods where I don't write at all. And I also agree with Ash that giving yourself that grace and letting yourself like know that it's okay not to write sometimes is a big step that you can take. But for me, from a broad perspective, I don't find it difficult to write, given the awfulness. But also, the world has always been awful, and it's going to continue to be awful. And like currently, I don't know that it's more awful. It's certainly differently awful. It's impacting different things. And use social media and the internet makes us much more aware of the global awfulness, so it's not even necessarily the things that are happening right here in my neighborhood. It's like all across the world, and I've got people in that place and people in that place, and I'm worrying about everyone and even people I don't know because it's scary. But right here in my house, the awfulness is limited. So basically my strategy is to compartmentalize. I'm scarily good at compartmentalizing sometimes. And when I write partly for myself, but mostly for one specific person. So I write for my best friend, and my whole goal is to bring joy to my best friend who is less good at compartmentalizing. So as long as I'm accomplishing that, it doesn't really matter if the world is on fire around me because I'm making her smile.
That's great. I love that. That's nice. SJ?
Yeah, it's I've pretty much always written probably as a bit of a way of controlling my brain and so on. Um, yeah, late diagnosed autistic, probably ADHD as well. So you know the commonalities there. Um, so it's always been a bit of an escape valve for me anyway. And totally hear what you're saying, Genevieve, in terms of different stuff going on now and so on. And it feels worse, I think, also because of the way the internet in particular is constructed to feed a lot of the bad stuff. That's not at all making it seem a lot less than it is because it's terrible. And it is different targets and so on. A lot of the way I've always written too is to try and actually work out what the hell's going on, and understand it. And also, yeah, explore some of the ways in terms of actually what are practical ways of tackling it. I love history and I also am fascinated by politics, but not party politics. That bores me to tears. But trying to sort of like capture stuff and sharing what I hear people say, but in a fictional way, is that kind of thing. But likewise, also spent a bit of time, particularly during the pandemic. I moved from London to a very small rural town in the Highlands. So it was a massive difference right at the start of the pandemic when it was happening. So it was a complete culture shift, in a lot of different ways. Uh, what you said, Ash, about giving yourself permission to actually not write, or as what I was doing was actually writing stuff that has now been shredded and incinerated. Um, but needed to do it just to cope with it, basically. So the process of writing as well as the content are both, to me, quite important.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Thank you for that. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think I very much compartmentalize things. And I'm also very much like immersed in politics from a non-party perspective because my politics lean much more anarchist and I don't, you know, go with the whole party system or whatever. Um, and what was I going to, and so, but additionally to that, for me, I feel like I've always like written about, you know, climate issues, political issues, that sort of thing. And we'll get to some specific things about shifting and what we focus on in a later question. But I feel like I was fairly productive, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. And then I got very sick. I had developed an autoimmune disorder. I'm type 1 diabetic, which, not very fun fact, you can develop at any age, which I was not really aware before I got sick. And that really shifted things for me personally, right? So like that was like a big sort of, there are really awful, terrible things going on in the world. And then there is this like individually specific awful thing that, um, could have been much worse, I guess, in a lot of ways, but I was really sick for a while in that. So that has been like, and I find now I'm more focused in a lot of ways than I was before because it really kind of, nothing like almost dying to, sort of focus your attention on
Do you
things.
recommend that as a writing technique?
Not at all. Not at all. Absolutely not. Really, really bad way
Yeah.
of finding focus. But it has, like it really has made me focus because I do feel like I have that like, little bubble in which there are really horrible, awful things going on everywhere, but I have a little bubble of not, of like sort of protecting my own peace and that within it. And I think that's like, for me, very important to like just, yeah. So, um, shall we go on to the next question? Which this is sort of a sub question because a couple of people brought this up when we were discussing this ahead of time about feelings of guilt or shame regarding with like thinking that what you're writing is like a silly thing to do while, you know, everything is on fire, or, you know, it's not very important, or you might feel that the specific sort of things that you're writing are looked down upon and that. And I wanted to, you know, like, what do you all sort of think about that or feel about that? And does anybody want to start, or I can call on you in turn?
Yeah, I'll start us off. Because again, my short answer is no, I feel no guilt or shame. But the reason I don't struggle with that is because the purpose of my writing is not a political act. I make my political statements by supporting organizations that align with my values and by spending my money as conscientiously as I can. And of course, my values are going to come through in my writing, but that's not the driving purpose. I'm not going out there trying to share my views with anybody. I'm trying to make my best friend happy. I'm writing for joy. That is my purpose. And if it brings me joy and it brings her joy, and if by some miracle it happens to bring other people outside of the two of us joy, brilliant. Like that's what I want, because there's so much dark and it's so heavy right now. Everything is so heavy right now. So having these moments of joy is so important, right? Like that can turn somebody's whole day around or their whole week around, because it's darkness everywhere. And then you get this little spark of, oh, well, that was, I don't know, delightful or silly or what have you. I don't think I mentioned that I write like cozy fantasy, cozy urban fantasy. And I have one book published. It's a novel in stories, which is also a fairly silly concept. But I love it. And I think it works. And I think it works particularly for the time, because the reason I chose to do it that way, even though a lot of people look at me like, what the heck even is that? And I have to justify myself. But I wrote it that way because at the time, my best friend was in a really big reading slump. She couldn't read a whole novel. So why am I going to write a whole novel if she can't read it? So I wrote her short stories, and then they tell an overarching theme, they have a overarching plot, right? So all of this stuff is happening, but it kind of builds slowly in the background. And by the end of it, she was reading the stories really, really quickly. And, you know, it pulled her out of her reading slump. And then it had this brilliant, I just did it for her. I didn't really think about the bigger impact. But since publishing it, a lot of people have said that to me, that this book has helped them get out of reading slumps because of the format. So yeah, it was a weird choice and maybe it was silly, but I don't feel guilty and I don't feel ashamed. And if you don't like it, then that's fine. There are plenty of other books out there for you.
That's great. SJ, you're nodding along too.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking, because some of the debates and so on that sort of like flare up on writing social media and stuff is always the, oh, you've got to do this, you know, particularly if you're chasing trad publishing, just as an example, because, you know, that's the only surefire way of making a fortune, as if anybody normal can actually ever make a fortune writing for a living. But the reality is diversity of what we make is so incredibly important. And yeah, so I would write both short stories and long fiction as well, because that satisfies me. I then try to find homes for them. That's slightly more difficult, but you know, it sort of gets there and so on. But to get back to the question, yeah, likewise, I don't really feel guilty or well, I don't feel ashamed by what it is that I write, because I think it's important, in general terms, to keep writing the stuff that I write, and sort of like seeking an audience for it. And likewise, a lot of the people who I know, both in person and sort of online, who also write a vast array of amazing stuff. like from cozy fantasies to quite dark horror, which are also actually a bit cozy, I find, because you know what's going to happen, and that's part of the thrill of it, and so on, and also just representing different people's experiences, and so on, and because this is what I like doing, is trying to puzzle out stuff and how do we actually resist the nastiness that's going on, and challenge the absolute push to uniformity that is also really driving an awful lot of what is going on, and all of that kind of thing. And also a massively huge fan of silly stuff. Because yeah, having a laugh in the in the face of people who don't want people laughing is actually really good, I think. I mean, it sounds very trite to say it, but actually, it's a really, really important thing. And likewise, I said it before, but showing who we all are and the sorts of things we are, from problematic through to not, whatever that means in reality, but also sharing what we know, and so on. So slight diversion in a way, but I absolutely love the fact that so many people are talking about the land on which you live now, and prior and continuing ownership and whatever all of that means. I was born and raised in Australia. We do that now in Australia, but certainly when I was living there, no, not even considered, and so on. So, and that to me has actually come through from people working it out, sharing it, and actually that's a really good thing to do. So, yeah.
Thank you. Rachel, did you have
Sure. Well, I'll weigh in from Team Guilt over here, uh, because I do write pretty niche, really specific types of fiction that, you know, I work with a small press, so it doesn't have a massive platform. And this is all time away from being in the streets with torches and pitchforks, which is what I really think we all should be doing. Um, so the very least, I have these moments of, should I be writing in a time like this, or should I at least be writing nonfiction? And I just finished reading this book called Genocide Bad by Sim Kern, which is exactly what it sounds like. And they begin with this history of their own career. And they have a lot in common with me, both demographically, but also they started out writing self-published and small press sci-fi. And then they became known for their TikToks. I'm like, well, um, is this what I should be doing? And that said, I think art is important. I think art is part of resistance. I think it both sustains us and it opens up possibilities for the imagination that nonfiction and straightforward facts don't. And so I try and balance my general guilty conscience, which is how I motivate myself to do anything at all, with, yeah, okay, even if this is important to me, this is what I need to do in order to get out into the street myself and impact the world in kind of more direct and tangible ways. Um, you know, there's people in Gaza who are still writing poetry and sharing their stories even when they don't have electricity. And so here I am in so-called Canada with Wi-Fi. I need to keep writing.
No, that's great. Thank you. Ash?
Yeah, I'm also team guilt. Especially because I'm writing I write romance and erotica, and you know, people get really weird about that in the first place. It's very like, oh, you just write romance. Like it's very looked down upon as
Mhm.
already. You know, like I have friends who are like, "Oh, you wrote a book, I want to read it." And then I'm like, "It's romance." And then they're like, "Never mind." So it's like rude. Um and what I'm writing is cozy fantasy romance. It shouldn't be political, but it is because I'm writing about trans, disabled, neurodivergent, brown people finding and building happiness in ways that doesn't fit the dominant scripts. And other people have made it political. So it's something that I kind of have to work at consciously, because I do have bad days where I'm like, my government is enabling the genocide in Palestine, and I'm sitting here writing kissing books. That feels really bad. But at the same time, I know, I'm writing the stories that I needed and I didn't have growing up. And I'm writing the stories that, um, helped me get through the pandemic. And I know other people feel the same way. Art is what helps us get through the dark times. And also, I'm just a spite-based life form. And I know that writing and publishing these stories is really going to piss off the TERFs and fascists. So, on my worst days, I just lean into that. I'm like, well, I'm going to write about trans people touching dicks and really just annoy some people who don't want more of that in the world. And that is usually pretty motivational.
What I
Spite
think is
very relatable. Sorry.
yes, the spite thing is definitely for sure. But I think it's really brilliant that both of you, Ash and Rachel, were like, I'm team guilt, but then also here is all of the justification why I shouldn't feel guilty.
I grew up Catholic, can you tell?
I mean,
it's good that you've done that work, and it's like, okay, I feel guilty, but I also recognize the importance of doing it anyways, right? Like, we feel how we feel.
mhm.
I just want to rep for those of us who do still feel bad.
Yeah.
Because like I would love to be in that place of like, no, I don't feel ashamed of what I write, but I do kind of. Especially when people get weird about it, but
people will get weird about anything, because like I write cozy fantasy. It's not that weird. It's not that weird. I'm not telling them about the monster smut or anything. It's just like, this is just a nice, cozy, light and fluffy fantasy story. And then they'll be like, I only read literary fiction. And it's like, okay, I wasn't asking you to read my book. You asked me about it. Why'd you have to make this weird? Because if you think you can out weird me, I can make this weirder. Right? Like,
I think that's funny what you said, Ash, about being raised Catholic, because my first note for this question for myself was, I don't feel guilt because I was raised Catholic, and I am 56 years old, and I have spent a long time, very diligently working on not feeling guilty about shit, because like, it's a lot, right? Like, it's a lot to get past and that sort of thing, right? And yeah. So so for myself, like, I will say, I do write like heavier stuff, right? Like, my work is pretty heavy. It often is very explicitly political in various different ways. And my day job is equally so. I work for a nonprofit. We do like government policy stuff around peace and security and global governance and that. So it's also very heavy. But I really value like the so-called lighter stuff, and like that's what, like, as a reader, as a consumer of media or whatever, like, I like that. I like cozy mysteries, and I like, like, my favorite Star Trek right now is Lower Decks. I love that show. I could rewatch it like just over and over again, like, and I don't think there's like, I think there's such a place for like the diversity of how we express ourselves and what we say, and the diversity of what we need at different points in time, like, and yeah, because I do feel like and so maybe that is, I said I don't feel guilt, but then I like work on this like really heavy stuff, and like, that's very kind of dark individually as well as like societally. So maybe not, like, I probably think I've dealt with things better than I have.
as long as the guilt is not interfering with you actually writing.
Yes,
Right?
I think that's key, right? It's like writing instead of therapy. I also run long distances, which, is also another sort of okay. So okay, this actually kind of ties in. I think our questions actually really sort of flow nicely one to the other, because the next question we have is has the type of writing you're doing changed in the current circumstances? Like, so are you writing sort of more hopeful things, more horror, or what have you? So let's start with Genevieve.
Sure. My writing certainly did get darker, but is that because of the current circumstances, or is it because I'm working on a sequel and I traumatized everybody at the end of book 1? I'm not sure. A little bit of both. When I write things outside of novel stuff, when I'm just kind of writing for the sake of writing, I think that has been skewing darker. And my reading certainly has. Like, I'm in a very long horror binge mode right now. And there was a brief moment like a couple months ago that I was like, everything is so heavy in the world. I'm going to read something light and fluffy. And I lasted like 2 pages. And then I was like, no, somebody's got to die. And then I went and picked up another horror. So, yeah, I don't know that it hasn't had a, I don't know that it's had a huge impact on the writing that I intend to publish, because that's part of a series and it's got to do what it's got to do.
Yeah. Rachel?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm mainly working on my novel series, which does it was described as a stone cold bummer, the first one. So I gotta continue with that. It's also my personal taste. Like I absolutely respect people who like escapism and coziness in fiction, but I have a really visceral reaction to it. I tend to feel worse when I read things like that, and I just, I just want to wallow. Um, so I'm wondering if I will ever hit a state of rock bottom emotionally where I start writing about whimsical tea shops, and I don't know how that will go. In terms of my short fiction, I mean, the last story I published was about 2 lesbian orcas sinking a billionaire's yacht and then eating him, which is probably the most cheerful thing I have ever written in my life. I mean, that's about as close to optimistic as I can possibly get.
Okay, so that's funny, because I don't know if you can see it, but the sticker I have in the back of my phone
Oh yeah.
orca that says "Eat the Rich." Anyway, not bad.
It's called "What If We Kissed While Sinking a Billionaire's Yacht." So it's exactly what it says on the package.
Nice.
Oh, SJ, what about you?
Oh, yeah, I think, as with Genevieve, my reading habits certainly changed over the last, I'll say, 10 years, give or take. But I went from a very high-powered, stressful job in which I barely could read anything outside of that, to sort of like stopping that, moving, everything else happening, and wanting to read all of the books on my to-be-read pile that were very high, and not being able to, just because it was like, and it wasn't the subject matter, it was just they were new. So I went back and reread old crime fiction, basically. So it's not quite horror, but yeah, serial killers, that kind of thing. And that got me back into reading properly and so on. But writing wise, it just so happened that when I left and everything, I got 2 commissions to write 2 novels at the same time. So one I'd already written mostly, but had to rewrite some of it. The other one was a completely from scratch, but it was a tie-in, so quite a different sort of like thing. But it was, they were kind of dictated in one sense in terms of what I had to do. Yeah, so, but equally kind of couldn't ignore what was happening. So the tie-in novel, which is part of a Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart from the Doctor Who universe stuff, and uh, yeah, stuff I think that if things that were going on at the time, which was around about 2020, 2021, weren't going on, it probably would have been much lighter touch in terms of stuff. But because it was set in 1978, when Britain was going through a version of what we're kind of going through again now, talk about repeating, it was like, yeah, I was doing quite a lot of research in terms of the rise of Thatcherism in the UK and everything, and sort of putting it in. My editor said that didn't actually happen in the Doctor Who universe, so we actually have to take out a lot of it. But he wanted
Oh.
to keep some of it, so some of it is still kind of there. We just changed some of the names, and so on. But yeah, so I think my way of doing it was responding to stuff that was happening, as opposed to necessarily kind of aiming for something, if that makes any sense whatsoever. Cool.
Ash?
Yeah, I definitely shifted other direction from everyone else. Um, I didn't start getting into fiction until about 2023, but before that I was, doing role-playing games, and the stuff that I wrote was like, before the pandemic and coming out as trans, it was real dark. It was about gender, and it was just like a lot of really dark explorations of, looking back on it, it's like this is stuff that was I was in deep denial about. Um, uh, but yeah, roundabout, um, the time that George Floyd happened, and I was getting cut off by my family for coming out as trans and all that stuff, I just stopped being able to engage with dark media, like consuming it. Before I used to love like The Last of Us, and I would read like not completely darker fiction, but I definitely like it was some of the stuff that I read. But it just got to the point where really dark media makes my anxiety and PTSD symptoms completely intolerable. So I just really had to like put it down and walk away from it. And likewise, the stuff that I was making really shifted as well. Like it became um, a really important survival strategy for me to write about trans joy, especially like early in my transition when I was going through the worst of it with, not being able to get um, the healthcare that I needed, and, being cut off from my family and all that stuff. So um, taking a hard left turn into writing about like trans joy was like a very important thing that I needed to do for my mental health.
Yeah, that totally that makes a lot of sense. I know for myself, so as I said, I tend to write like darker stuff and have always written. I started out when I sort of went back to writing seriously when my kids were started school. I was writing literary fiction for reasons that I'm not entirely clear of. But that was very dark. And then I switched to writing science fiction, which is something that I've loved since I was a kid. And equally, when people say it's like devastating or something, I'm like, yes, hit the mark. That was what I was going for, sort of thing. But I definitely noticed that I have been writing, so I do write mostly short fiction, and I have noticed that I've been writing a lot more stuff where there are like sort of small, intimate moments of personal joy within these like larger, darker societal situations and that. So they're not necessarily upbeat, I wouldn't say, but they like just those moments of possibility and stuff that are, kind of embedded within them. And so, which was not a conscious thing entirely. I mean, one of them it was for a submission call for an anthology, and it is being published in the next few months. So that, worked out well. But it has been more of a subconscious kind of thing that I've noticed. And also I started writing horror, and I've liked horror for a long time. I was when I was a teenager in the 80s, because I'm old. I was very into like Nightmare on Elm Street and like all of those sorts of, Halloween and all of those like that. I was very, very into that sort of stuff. So, but I've started writing horror, and I do have a horror story, my first one coming out before the end of the year. So that was, I mean, it is climate horror, so that ties in with a lot with like other stuff that I write in a more science fiction-y way. Um, but it was interesting to sort of, to write like real horror, and it's set in Canada in Northern Ontario too. So I'm very
Amazing.
happy about, yes, not enough stuff gets set in tiny old mining towns where my family's from. So yeah. But I mean, there has been that shift. And I think for me too, like this is like the bigger, as I said before, like the bigger awfulness, but also this, having a chronic illness now and navigating that sort of situation. Because I've also started thinking a lot more about how we use technology and how we demonize technology because it's used badly, even though there are like these massive benefits and stuff. And anyway, that's a whole other panel probably. I'll pitch that for next year. Okay, so we have just under 10 minutes left, and we have 2 questions. So they kind of go together though. So this was my question for you all. And it's that one thing that I found over the last 5 or 6 years is that I really need to be intentional about seeking out things that bring happiness and joy. Not necessarily writing related, or at least not to begin with, because I don't know about you all, but for myself, like I find that even if I like pick up a hobby or an interest or something that's theoretically not related to writing, it ends up like working its way into what I'm writing anyway. So it all becomes one thing. But I find like that, like if I like seek out these things, that joy like spills over. And even if it doesn't like, isn't, already into my writing, it's like that sort of sense of individual sort of whatever helps. Are there particular things that bring you happiness despite everything? SJ, do you want to start?
Sure. Just really simply, it's remembering back to why I like science fiction, and speculative fiction and the sorts of speculative fiction that I actually like, and what I grew up with as a kid that stuck with me and kind of all of that sort of like stuff. Some of it is also having the time and I'll say brain space, but as you age, that gets a bit weird. But working on craft and actually sort of like trying to write better and what does that actually mean? And especially the way things are changing and all of that kind of thing too. So, and also just enjoying talking to other writers and listening to what other writers have to say, and then recognizing, even though that we're all very, very different, we're all our unique selves. There are so many similarities as well. There's sort of, ping up. And yeah, and as you say, Monique, I think that stuff does leak into what I'm writing. Whether it survives the cut, who knows? But let's see how it goes. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Ash?
Um, yeah, so I'm saying this as someone with ADHD and autism, and I really hate it when people are like, have you tried exercise? So it really annoys me that exercise really is the best thing, that like I have twice as many spoons when I exercise. So I'm just like the most annoyed at myself for being like this. And if I go a week without going to Kung Fu, I'm like, why do I feel so terrible and I can't do anything? And then I'll go to a Kung Fu class and I'm like, right, my stupid brain needs exercise. So, for those of you who are living the same struggle, find an exercise you don't hate. It's part of why I do Kung Fu. I get to play with swords and it's rad. But like, if you're living that neurodivergent life, it really does like, I have so much more bandwidth that I can apply to my writing when I'm keeping up with it. The other thing that I would say is like um, removing distractions from your writing time. And that's something that I've spent several years doing of, like creating my space so it's not, you know, distracting, but also like making sure that I'm not distracting myself with social media. And sometimes that means leaving my phone in a different room, you know, or just stuff like that. Like really like, and you're going to screw up sometimes. And sometimes you're gonna be like, I'm going to write, and then you're going to spend an hour and a half on Tumblr or whatever. But like, yeah, that's been the other thing that's been really helpful in terms of just like writing more, is just working on like not sabotaging myself.
That's so relatable. And I just want the exercise thing. I hate that I have to relearn that over and over again, how much better it makes me feel. Like it's just stupid that I have to. Dana had a great question in the chat about how do you get the spoons to even begin to exercise? And I'm not saying that this will work for everybody. It absolutely won't. But for myself, I signed up for a race, a running race. And then I had to do the training plan because I am like sort of fixated enough on things that if I commit to do something, I feel compelled to do it. If I like download an app that tells me how long to run every day, I will do that. Be, I don't know why, but if it pops up as something that I need to do every day, I'm gonna do it. So yeah, and I'm running a half marathon next weekend, you know, like I do that sort of thing regularly. And you know what? Like it keeps me, you know, also exercise classes on the same day. I also do bar classes, same days every week. And, you know, same time, same day. And it just like becomes something that's on the schedule and it's immovable. So I don't know. That works for me.
I find for the because I agree with the whole exercise thing, and it is really irritating.
Yeah.
And so I used to own a bookstore, so I was in a customer facing job, and I had to commute there, and I would ride my bike or walk there every day. And I closed it last year. So like this past year, I've been full-time freelance editing from home, and I have realized that I need to put a lot more effort into getting out of my house because the exercise used to be built in, right? It was a 10K walk or bike ride to get there and back every day. And now I don't have that. So I have to be very like, okay, go for a walk. So I do like the same morning routine, and then I go for a walk and basically just commute back to my house. But I have taken up rock climbing, which I used to do when I was younger, and then didn't have a buddy and whatever. So the thing about rock climbing is that you need two people to do it. So if I don't feel like it, I also don't want to cancel because I know that my climbing buddy is itching to go, and it's like, I can't let her down. So now I have to push through and go. So if you can find an activity that you can do with somebody, and you know they can't or won't do it without you, that helps you push through the fact that you don't have spoons.
Yeah, find yourself enablers. I mean, I had written
Yes.
down that it's the community that brings me joy, both the writing community and the activist community. Like they want us isolated, fearful, and miserable. And
Yes.
anything that you can do that's going to engage with the world and other people is an act of resistance.
I absolutely, I think absolutely, you know, it's so we did have like one more question, but we also only have one more minute, so we don't really have, but we've actually already touched on it because it was about practical suggestions, right? And what I was going to say was exactly what Rachel was just like-minded community, right? Like it goes so far. And it is like, you know, in touch with other people and doing things with other people, but also doing things with other people who understand where you're coming from and who you don't like, you know, where it's not going to be a struggle to explain yourself all of the time. And I mean, I know I'm the organizing team lead here at RSM, but I really like that about this, right? That like I don't feel like I have to explain myself, right? Like if I say that, like, you know, I really enjoy queer normative stories, even if they're kind of corny or, you know, basic or whatever. It's like other people will understand that without needing an explanation, right? And I think, you know, yeah, that you know, goes
Yeah.
so far, right? Like having that shared, you know,
Yeah.
space, and it gives you strength to go out and, you know, as Rachel, as you were saying earlier, right? Like going out in the streets and doing stuff and like just like, you know, knowing that you have that around you wherever it is. So, does anybody else have any last words before we?
My suggestion kind of ties into that, which was basically stay focused on your audience. It doesn't matter what the people who don't read your books think about your books, right? So just
Yeah.
who are you writing for, and keep them in mind as you're doing it, because they want to read it. So let that motivate you.
Jay, Ash, Jamie.
No, I think that's a good note to go out on. I can't say anything better than that.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys all so much for joining me for this. I think this was a really great conversation, and I really appreciate everybody's contributions to it. I got a lot out of it. Thank you all so much. And thank you for our audience for being here and sharing this with us. You can keep talking about this on the Discord. There's a channel devoted to each panel. So you can go there. And I know that Angie has been putting stuff that we've been talking about into the Discord during the panel. So you can go and check that out. I hope you join us for our next session, which will be in, well, 39 minutes now, I guess, because we're 1 minute over. And that will be another block of readings that people will be doing. So I think some of our panelists here will be on doing those readings. And so thank you all, and see you all very soon. So bye-bye.